Establishing a federal ICAC was a platform Labor campaigned heavily on in the lead up to the election 2 weeks ago. It informed an important part of the party's victory. Now, First AML's Andrew Jackson says it is crucial that the party return to its 2019 promise of establishing broader anti-money laundering laws to include real estate agents, solicitors, and also accountants. Jackson says money laundering is a major problem and the party has to back Green Senator Nick McKim's bill. Now, according to Jackson, implementing Tranche 2 will actually protect Australians from the impacts of money laundering. Joining us today is Andrew Jackson. Morning, Andrew.
Hi, Michael. Nice to have you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Now, what firstly is Tranche 2?
So Tranche 2 is the expansion of the Anti-Money Laundering Act. So at the moment in Australia, only financial service firms and a couple of others such as casinos are regulated. This expands it, as you said, to real estate, legal, and the accounting professions as the bulk of it. There are a couple of additional ones, but that's the main industries that would then come under this act, and they would have to, depending on what the act says, do a certain level of due diligence on their customers to ensure they are not laundering money through the service being offered by those lawyers, real estate agents, or accountants.
Now, we've recently seen a lot of reporting around two of the major casino operators, SAR and Crown, come unstuck with some shocking exposés about what was going on. We've seen a lot of it in the sports gambling industry go on. They have integrity bodies. Will this be something that individual real estate agents will do, or will there be an overriding body, do you think, Andrew?
So the body that goes around and does the investigating and lays out the fines, AUSTRAC, they at the moment look like the person or the body who will look after this for the expansion. But until we really get into the nitty-gritty and the bill starts being read in Parliament, that has to happen by the 30th of September. That's the one submitted by Senator McKim you mentioned. There will be multiple readings of that in House and Senate, as we know. And until they decide what the legislation is going to look like, it's uncertain if AUSTRAC's remit will expand, they will get extra resources, or if they may look to, in the future, combine a couple of the bodies who look after the general financial well-being of this country and the regulations. What we do know is we need the regulation to be there to help the firms who are in this Tranche 2 bracket combat money laundering. It's not saying, oh, well, you've got to be regulated because you're bad. I'm sure there's a couple of bad apples in there, but it's if we don't put regulation in there and ensure that these checks are done, how can we stop the level of money laundering happening? And we want to make sure that we're saying money laundering is bad, and then the regulation is going to help these firms stop that money laundering problem and then being abused by the money launderers.
Now, the money laundering problem isn't just a problem of itself that you think that, well, that doesn't affect me. I'm not a money launderer. But you're saying it can actually be pushing up property prices as well with this influx of money that just needs to be cleaned rather than needs to be profitable.
100%. I mean, back in 2020, AUSTRAC estimated that there was between 1 and 2 billion from Chinese sources alone being laundered through the property market in Australia. So that's 1 year, one industry, one nation, 1 to 2 billion. And what that does is it pushes those property prices up, it reduces stock on the market, and then these properties, they're not necessarily $10, $20 million properties. They may be lower value properties and they sit there empty because all the overseas or nationals who want to launder through the real estate industry want to do is put their money somewhere safe that when they get it out, it is legitimate. So they don't care about putting renters in there. They just want to launder that cash. So that impacts general society. And I think that's the clearest way to bring this conversation to the masses in Australia is to talk about it from a real estate perspective and how vulnerable the real estate industry is to money launderers taking them for a ride.
And obviously, the higher the price, the better it is for the launderers because they get to put more of their dirty money into it, whether it's profitable or not.
That's exactly it. So you look at places like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, the major cities, they are going to be the first place that these money launderers target. And frankly, without tranche two, Australia has become one of the money laundering capitals of the world because it's so easy. The lawyers, the accountants, and the real estate agents are kind of the gatekeepers, if you will. And by the time it runs through those systems and it's into property, then it's too late to do the checks on it. And the money launderers have got away with what they were intending.
Yeah. Now, the Labor, the Greens and the Independents all have a chance to really drive this. What do you think needs to happen for this to become a priority?
So what I love that's just happened is ALP, the Greens, and a lot of the teal or the independent candidates ran on instituting the ICAC, that Libs and the coalition has said they would do it, they didn't get around to it, or they didn't want to do it. Now, anti-corruption and the ethical battle against money laundering are hand in hand. They are the same side of a coin. We've just seen that the ALP have moved where the anti-money laundering ownership sits from Home Affairs to the Attorney General. So it's in the same basket as anti-corruption, which I see as a good move. It raises its profile, but also they can then work on these two pieces together. Now, the wider Australian public really want to see what is going to happen with ICAC. But at the same time, the bill has to be read before the September 30 deadline. So I would like to see ALP get behind that bill and some of the independents as well, because as I say, it's the same type of conversation. We're trying to stop bad things happening in Australian society. If Labor throw their weight behind it, we can move this through the parliamentary process. Now that may take months, it could take half a year, whatever it might be, but then it's let's implement it like a lot of the rest of the world have done. You only have to look at New Zealand, Singapore, the UK. Many other nations have implemented this, they saw the need, and it is helping them and the wider society combat money laundering.
Where does Australia stand in relation to the rest of the world? Do we have a ongoing agreement with other nations? Because it would seem a big hole in the net if all of the nations are on board, and then we hear so much about the Panamas and the tax havens, which are basically the same sort of thing, aren't they, Andrew?
Yeah, so there's the global body, FATF, that's the Financial Action Task Force. Now, they're the ones who, excuse me, make the recommendations to say, this is what we think your anti-money laundering practices should be. And they say, well, there's the financial services, and then there's the other ones that will be tranche two. And at the moment, a number of countries many countries have got the regulations in place or are making steps towards them. We are one of the few, alongside places like Haiti and Madagascar, that haven't done what we'd call tranche two. So we're seen as a weaker nation on stopping money laundering coming in. Therefore, do foreign countries, do foreign investors really want to put their legitimate money in here, because we're not guarding it properly? If you look at the UAE, they recently got grey listed by the FATF, which means they are on this watch list to say, you're really not performing very well. And we know from historical records that that can have up to a 7% hit on their GDP, because people just don't want to invest in there. And yes, we're at risk of that as well if we don't make some moves in the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, we recently saw one of the big four whacked with thousands of penalties for failing to do their bit for money laundering. If we're not getting the big four right, what chance do the rest of the, as you say, real estates and solicitors and accountants, what chance do they have?
Well, that's it. There's a lot of education that needs to happen. And this is where firms such as ourselves, First AML, we come in and we will help remove some of the burden. There are firms that operate in the compliance and risk program provisioning to tell you what you need to do. And there's firms such as ourselves who will say, well, we'll take the burden of that work off you. You can focus growing your business, providing great customer experience. So that's part of it. But I think AUSTRAC's remit started off as, well, we need to look at the top end of town and work our way down, hence the big four banks, the two major casinos, and some other foolish players who have stuck their head a little bit too high by doing the wrong thing. But what you will find is most people will start coming along on the journey of doing the right thing. And then Austrac or whoever it will end up being can focus on the ones who are either so big they need to pay attention to them, or, as I say, they're sticking their hand up and going, yeah, I'm actually doing something really badly. You should probably look at me. But it won't be a change overnight. There'll be a lot of education for the industry, but it is necessary education and it's a necessary change.
Well, hopefully now with the change of government and given Labor's major platform on ICAC and the support for the independents and the Greens across, we'll see some real action on this. So Andrew Jackson from First AML, thanks so much for your time and your insights.
Thanks for the chat, Michael. Anytime.